Because Adam+Eve would go on to have one of the best decades in the industry.
We bought them, merged the two companies.
Tell us a story about that.
This is such an Adelaide cliche. It was in the Gutter Bar in Cannes. I think we probably talked from about 2 in the morning till about 4 in the morning. I remember going back to London the next day and thinking, did we have that conversation? And I got in touch with James and said, did we have that? And he said, yeah, we did. We did loads and loads of planning. We were so paranoid about secrecy about it. We would meet in, out of the way places. And in fact, we used to rent hotel rooms to go and meet in a room because we just didn't want to be seen. We were the only 2 people who knew.
And maybe some people at the bar in Cannes.
Well, funny enough, the rumours started going around. These things are never done till they're done. And unfortunately, it did leak. So we had calls from campaign saying very authoritatively, we know you're buying Adam+Eve. You're going to have to confirm it. I said, no, we're not. We're buying it when we've bought it. And we just saw an opportunity and we went to them and said, can we buy the business? And they said, yes.
How much?
20 million quid.
Is it scary?
It was scary because in effect we swapped one master for another, which is the banks that we borrowed money from. We raised some money and we borrowed some money. We relaunched it as Engine.
It's the birth of Engine. So what's your advice to businesses who may be facing a tough couple of years?
You want to go into any tough times as lean as you can be, as competitive as you can be. Good firms come through stronger, weaker firms have a tougher time. Having worked through at least 3 recessions, tough times come to an end and better times return. So you want to be sure that you're going to come through. Hi, I'm Stephen Woodford. This is how I became CEO of the Advertising Association.
This guest grew up in the 60s, so he knows what's groovy and what's not. From dancing to the Beatles to seeing Bowie's monumental performance on Top of the Pops. Influenced greatly by the ads he would see in newspaper, he decided he wanted into the industry now and not later. He's been through some challenges and endured the shake of the dot-com crash. And now he heads up an organisation bringing responsibility to ads that may seem a bit too flash. A true voice of the industry, there for many important occasions. Welcoming Stephen Woodford, the CEO of the Advertising Association.
Lovely. Thank you very much. That's
Welcome.
great. Thank you. My first ever poem.
So this is the story of how did you become CEO of the Advertising Association and CEOs of many other companies and chairman of many of the world's most respected and renowned advertising agencies. So let's unpack it and let's go back to 1959 where it all began. Paint the picture of your life growing up.
So I was born in Watford, where my dad grew up. My parents lived in a little flat beneath my grandmother, who lived in the flat upstairs. I've got some very early memories of Watford, but then we moved to a place called Farnborough in Hampshire. But the place where I really feel I grew up is a place called Camberley in Surrey. And I left when I was 18 and went to university. I never lived there again, but those years between, I think, 11 and 18 are, I think, where everybody feels their formative years are.
And where did your love of advertising come from?
Well, I knew my 2 favourite subjects at school were art and economics. And if you think about advertising, it's this sort of blend of creativity and commerce. So that not that I chose those subjects particularly because that was where I thought I would go, but my favourite lesson was art. But I also loved economics because I loved the whole thing of understanding how the economy works and, in a sense, all of the societal issues that come out of the way that wealth is created and distributed and so on. And we had a great economics teacher who used to engage us in really fantastic debates about left v right and rich versus poor and east v west then, because it was in the Cold War. We're back again now. And then art was just this wonderful escape of going to the art room. And a bit like this room, actually, a room full of art. And after school, I used to go and paint and do still lifes and things like that. Out of that, I remember just one of the things I used to like doing in a sort of artistic sort of fashion was doing cut-ups of magazines, cutting out images from magazines and doing montages of them and doing drawings around them and that sort of thing. And I used to just love doing these sort of compositions of things. And I used to cut up a lot of ads and then editorial around it and used to do this sort of stuff. And I remember my parents were avid readers of the Sunday Times. So we'd get the Sunday Times every weekend. So I used to particularly love the Sunday Times. The Sunday Times then was full of brilliant print ads. So I used to look at the ads and I used to think, well, yeah, actually, I'd quite like to do that. And that was probably at about, I don't know, 15, something like that. I'd thought advertising might be the place I go.
So how did you pursue this passion that you began to develop?
Well, I got to 18 and had the dilemma of what to do next. And of course, then only about, I suppose, maybe 10% of kids went to university or college. Most people went to work.
Yeah.
So it was only a small group of people in my year who were going to go to university or to art college. And I was wrestling between the two. I couldn't make my mind up in classic sort of teenage dithering around style. And I applied to both. And I went for interviews at art college to do a foundation. And I really felt I was quite good at art, but not really good at art. And when you go to art college, you look around and you think, oh my God, there's so much better. I just felt intimidated by the quality of the work that I was seeing. And I went to university and had some interviews there. And I just thought, I'm going to go and do economics. So I did economics at university. And this was in the late 70s. I graduated in 1980. The economy was in a terrible state. There was always the headlines, the sick man of Europe. And unemployment was very high everywhere. I think it was about 1 in 8 young people were unemployed. So all sorts of social problems coming from that. So you were just paranoid about getting a job. You did not want to be on the dole when you came out of university. And so I started doing, applying, milk round type jobs. And I applied to 4 agencies and 4 marketing jobs. And I got to, I think, second interview for out of 8 applications, I maybe got 5 or 6 second interviews. And in the end got turned down by everybody. And then the last one, so I'm just in absolute trepidation, this last letter to arrive. Am I going to get a job? Anyway, I got a job, and it was as a marketing trainee at Nestlé. But my fallback was I was going to go funny enough, back to my roots to Watford, because Watford then ran a very well-regarded course in advertising.
Yeah, I think Paul Bainsford actually mentioned that.
Paul Bainsford, he may well have even done it.
Yeah, he did.
Oh, he did.
Oh, well, okay. Well, he and I might have actually been students together, because had I not got a job, I had a place at Watford College, and I was going to go do the postgrad advertising course. So I knew I knew I had something to do, which was my main worry was not having to do, and just having to, desperately scrab around finding a job along with loads of other people who are trying to find jobs. So I got the job at Nestlé, started on that, and I could not believe my luck, because it was a really nice job, great company. Having been a really poor student in London, walking everywhere because I had no money, suddenly I was paid £4,400 a year.
Rolling in it.
Oh my God, so much money.
Bags of money.
Bags of money,
Oh.
yeah. So, and it was great training and lovely people and so on. So I got straight into the world of work.
What kind of skills did you develop in this role?
So I was there for 2 years, and by far the best thing that I did there was you did a sort of 3-month induction and various courses and things like that, and then you were put in the sales force for 6 months as a sales rep, and you were given you also remember a car called a Ford Cortina, but the Ford Cortina was like the most popular car in Britain. It was the sales rep's car. It's like a family 4-door saloon.
Like a Mini Cooper for estate agents now, maybe.
Like a Mini Cooper for estate agents now, but nowhere near as nice as a car as a Mini Cooper.
That's a good comparison.
It was a 1.3L with no radio. That's how basic it was. So it was the cheapest Ford Cortina, and I was given a territory, and that was my patch, and I had to go and be a sales rep. And I was living in Kennington then, and I was the only sales rep to live on his patch, because my territory was Brixton, Streatham. So I got out of bed, just drove a quarter of a mile down the road to my first call on a Monday morning, which was a cash and carry in Vauxhall.
You could have walked.
I could have walked, yeah. But I had lots of product in the car, so got shouted at by the buyer there, and then went around the whole patch, and I was basically done by lunchtime, as most days. You had to do 7 calls a day, and I would hurtle around because I was on such a small. They 7 calls were on the basis that you had a 5-mile drive between each one. I had no more than 2 miles to drive. So I was finished by lunchtime, and I used to do all sorts of stuff in the afternoon. I had afternoons free, so it was
lovely. Sweet deal.
Great.
Yeah, it was very nice. Yeah.
So 2 years passed in this role.
Yeah.
Where do you go next? What drove you to the next step?
Well, the thing I liked best was after doing a sales rep thing, I was then assigned to a brand, and I was working on Nescafe, which was the biggest brand in the company, hugely successful brand. Spent in those days a huge amount of money. Spent I think like 25 million a year on advertising, which was massive in the early 80s. And our agency was McCann's, and every Friday we'd go to McCann's for the status meeting. And we go through all the work and stuff like that. And that was the bit of the week I liked best. We'd spend the morning at McCann's. We'd hope that my very sort of Calvinistic boss would say, let's stay and maybe have lunch with the agency. And he'd always say, no, we're done now. Let's go back to Croydon. And we'll be going back to Croydon, slightly grumpily. But I loved the McCann's people, and I really liked going in there. I like the whole feel of going in there. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to work in a place like this.
Yeah. So what's next?
So I went to Lintas. I applied for various agency jobs. I got a job at Lintas, and it was in a place called New Fetter Lane, which is just between Fleet Street and High Holborn. And Lintas was it was a really great halfway house actually between an advertiser, being an advertiser, and an agency, because Lintas then it stood for Lever International Advertising Services. It was Unilever's in-house agency.
Okay.
So about half the business was Unilever and half was other clients. And I worked on some Unilever business, and I worked on Japan Airlines, and it was so much fun.
Did you have any idea at this point? Obviously, you would eventually become CEO of agencies, I just
managing
director.
Just drifted from job. Were
you ambitious? Were you pushing
not really.
for a great career?
No, I wasn't particularly ambitious.
But were you progressing well?
I was progressing at a pedestrian rate that everybody.
Okay.
I went from account manager to account director, and sort of plodding along. I wasn't very ambitious. I just enjoyed. I just enjoyed working. I felt happy to be working, and I think when I was at Woodford, I met my now wife. Actually, no, it was when I was at Lintas. In 1984, I met my wife, and we were. I suppose the 80s was, having grown up in the 70s where the economy was terrible. In the 80s, things started to recover, and it was like we were living through the Thatcher Revolution, which was also lots of extraordinary transformation of the economy, lots of pain as old industries had to close. But London started to boom. In the early 80s, it was just beginning to happen. And my wife and I, she was working in advertising as well. So we were very much, I think we didn't realize it at the time, but we were very much part of that 80s sort of, I suppose, zeitgeist of, fast growing industries. Creative industries were growing fast. Advertising was growing fast. So property market was beginning to take off. We were able to buy flats age 24 or something, which of course most 24-year-olds can't dream of now. But property was relatively cheap, although interest rates were very high. So we felt like we were in a sort of, so we just concentrated on the next thing, buy a flat, the next thing, get a car, the next thing, have a nice holiday together, get married, get a little house, all that sort of stuff. So I was never thinking, everything was just the next thing. So I wasn't ambitious. And in fact, if I had any view about advertising, it was that I would be out of it in my 30s and I'd do something else.
Okay.
So, shows how wrong you can be in your 20s.
So by 91, you become deputy managing director by 91? Is that by 95?
I went after Woodford Allen. I went to WCRS for the first time. For 2 years.
Which you would later become CEO.
Which I later become CEO.
What was your role then when you joined?
I joined as a group account director.
Okay.
And that was fantastic. WCRS in the late 80s. I think I joined in 88, I think.
What was the reputation?
Our reputation was just, it was the archetypal 80s agency. BMW was its biggest client. BMW, if you were to choose a brand that epitomized the 80s, it would be BMW. And the 3 Series BMW, and those classic BMW ads, and the agency was on an absolute roll, and it did brilliant work for BMW. And I didn't work on BMW. I worked on Carling, which was a very famous account there. It was Britain's most popular advertising campaign at the time, and so I did that for a while. Then after 2 years, I went to Leo Burnett and became deputy MD there.
Okay, and Leo Burnett is well known for creating brand mascots. So
yeah,
the Green Giant,
Tony the Tiger. Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was a classic American agency, very much. Although obviously it was the London agency, very much the sort of sense of a Chicago agency. And I went to Chicago a few times, and it was this iconic Midwest agency. And Leo Burnett, who was the founder, had all these incredible writings about advertising, and it had that sort of simple, almost quite homespun Midwest philosophy.
So if I'm listening now and I'm, in a senior role, you know, you were group account director, maybe something similar in advertising or a different industry.
Yeah.
And I would love to become a associate managing director or MD. What's your advice about how did you make that transition?
Well, I'd love to say it was brilliantly planned, but I was just headhunted, and they wanted somebody. Leo Burnett at the time wanted somebody who had a stronger creative track record than the agency had, and I had a very good creative track record on Carling. So they were looking for somebody from an agency then like WCRS or GGT or BBH to come over there. And part of the deal was a sense of a move up. I became head of account management, deputy MD. So the first time I was not just running accounts, but I was running a department.
How was that transition for you? How did you cope with that?
Actually, it was quite. Looking back, it was quite hard because going into a place where you know nobody, and coming from an agency culture that was very different, it was quite hard. But it took I don't know, 6-9 months to really, I think, probably find my feet there. I was working on Procter & Gamble, which is a very, very, if you haven't never worked on P&G before, very difficult, tough business to work on. Amazing clients in terms of so smart and just, the best marketers probably in the marketplace. So really, really demanding, clever clients. Agency had to always be on top of its game. And that was a great learning experience. So I really enjoyed that. We also had the good fortune to have the biggest win that they'd had in years.
What was that?
It was Mercedes. And I was on the pitch for that. And we were up against 3 other agencies, all of which were much, much more glamorous than we were. And we only were on the list because Leo Burnett had Mercedes in other parts of the world. So we were seen as the rank outsider, and we won it.
How? How did you overcome that?
Well, we won it because we did good work, and we really listened to the clients, and I think we had a very solid strategy. But we had an amazing chap called Simon Broadbent who worked for us. And Simon Broadbent was in many ways the father of sort of econometrics in advertising. And he took loads and loads of car data, and he looked particularly at BMW and Mercedes and Audi as the 3 leading German luxury brands. And he did all sorts of analysis about the marketplace. And then again, I mean, there was some very crude computers then, but he plotted this stuff out on graphs. He actually, I think, hand plotted stuff,
Wow.
And he demonstrated that car for car, BMW, I think, in effect, charged £1,000 more per car. And he basically attributed that to the power of the brand, because BMW had a stronger brand reputation in the UK market than Mercedes did. And this analysis at the time was felt to be like really mold breaking, and the Mercedes clients really loved it. And so I would say, although we did great work, we had a very nice strategy, the core of our pitch had this fantastic analysis from this amazing man, Simon Broadbent. So anyway, we won the pitch, and it was a transformational win for Burnett's, and they went on to do fantastic work for it.
Brilliant.
And for the first time in years, Burnett's were winning at Cannes Lions and stuff like that. So it was part of a renaissance. It led a renaissance in Burnett's in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So your next move is
back to WCRS.
Back to WCRS. And what's your first role there?
I went back in again as head of client service. So it was a sort of sideways move.
So you're no longer a deputy MD.
No longer. I just went as head of account management.
Did that feel like a step backwards, or?
No, funny. It weirdly enough, it felt like coming home, because I loved that agency. I still kept in touch with a lot of the people there, and it had a fantastic bar, and I used to go there still a lot. So I used to go and hang out there still, and I still had lots of friends there. So although I was gone for 4 years, I felt like I had a lot of affinity with it, and I just thought it's the place I want to be.
And this is the beginning of your rise to your first CEO role.
And then the then CEO, about 2 months after I left, resigned, and there was a sort of internal competition to be MD, and I became MD. So it was a really
2 months after you left.
So 2 months after I joined the agency, he resigned, went to AMV, and then Robin was the chairman, Robin White, and there were 3 internal candidates to be MD.
How was that, having colleagues that are all fighting for the same position?
Well, we all were friends, and we all knew each other well, and it was all, I mean, I felt it was all very good natured. I hope they would say the same thing. It was very much Robin's choice.
I see.
Okay.
And why did he choose you, do you think? So that people can learn what are the things that a CEO would look for.
The only thing he never told me, and I remember being very surprised that I was chosen. And the agency was in a terrible state at the time.
Why?
Because we were losing a lot of business. We had really high staff turnover. The chief exec leaving, I think, it was a real shock to the agency. There's a sense that the agency was sort of in trouble, really.
And so had the .com bust happened yet?
this was pre that. This was in about 95, I think. And there was a real sense that the agency was sliding, and so I took over. In fact, I can remember we had this fantastic bar down in the basement of the building, and had this spiral staircase that went down to the bar. And basically, the MDs you do your presentation from the staircase because you see everybody across the bar. So I think whatever day of the week it was, Wednesday or whatever, and Robin said, we knew Robin was going to make a decision. He'd seen us all individually. He said, I'm going to think about it over the weekend, and then I'm going to make my decision next week. So I think on the Tuesday or Wednesday, he called us all up and told us. And I think he may have told me, I can't remember if he told me first or second or third or whatever. But anyway, he told me, I remember it was 5:00. And he said, I'm going to call the agency together at 5:30 and you're going to talk to them. So that's like, right, here's your new MD. You've got half an hour to think about what you're going to say.
Oh, wow. That's not long.
Not long. And that's actually, I'm glad it wasn't long because I couldn't agonize over it. And
what did you say?
I said, I had 3 ideas. And I said, the first thing we're going to do is stop doing new business. We were a new business machine and people were worn out from pitching. And we were on that sort of vicious circle of losing business and therefore pitching in ever more desperate fashion, not winning, taking resource away from existing clients, losing more business. So we were in this sort of spiral. I said, we are going to stop pitching.
That's a big decision to make when you've got 30 minutes to prepare.
Yeah. But it was in a sense, all these things were blindingly obvious. So
right.
So you probably, any account manager would have said, stop pitching for Christ's sake.
I see.
So I said, we're going to stop pitching. We're going to focus on our existing clients, and we're going to focus on our people. Too many people are leaving. I want you to stay. I want us to get this agency back on track, and let's focus on our clients and let's do great work for them.
Did you feel like I am taking an MD role of a sinking ship in some ways?
Not a sinking ship, a ship that was had lost power in at least one of the engines.
Okay.
It was drifting a bit and it was a bit stormy. So it felt, and then Robin and I spent the first probably 2 weeks just going around seeing all our clients. And that was a very nice time because I didn't really know Robin that well. And obviously he had a very nice BMW and a chauffeur, because in those days, agency chairman had that sort of stuff. So we zoomed around from client to client in his BMW. And between each meeting, we'd be talking about what the client, we'd have a little briefing pack and we'd look at the work and we'd look at what the issues were. And we went around, just saw them all and just said, I knew some of them, but most of them I didn't know. Here's the new MD. We're going to do this. And I would chat to them about what I wanted to do and so on.
Brilliant. Do you feel like that speech you gave improved the morale of everyone that was there?
I think it couldn't have got worse, put it that way. Morale was low. About 2 months later, one of our clients gave us some more business. Yeah. So I could stand up in front of the agency and say, we've won our first client. Excellent. And it was a new brand from an existing client. We did Radox and Badidas, so do bath products. I think it might have been a brand called Sanex, which is like a sort of, I think it's still around.
Sanex,
still out, yeah.
And I made a big deal that we've been appointed by Sarah Lee to do Sanex. The reality was they couldn't give it to one of their other agents because there was a conflict. I think it was sort of Hobson's choice for them. I made a deal. I did say we've been given this vote of confidence by Sarah Lee, and that was a little shot of adrenaline. And then I said, right, we're now, after I did 3-4 months, I said, I think we've stabilised things. We're going to pitch very selectively. And the first pitch we had was for First Direct. And, I don't know if anybody's First Direct customers, but it's an amazing, amazing brand. It's still rated by its customers the best bank in the world in terms of customer service. Oh. And against great competition. And we won it. And it was the start of a 10-year relationship with that client that they only left in the end when it was it was part of HSBC and it was all consolidated into WPP. I remember one New Year's, just after New Year, one year meeting with a fantastic marketing director who had been there the whole 10 years. And I had lunch with him and he said, I'm sorry about this. He said, I'm going to have to move the business. I've been hanging on there and making all sorts of excuses, but either I fire you and move the business or I get fired. So I'm sorry, it's you. And funny enough, years later, he and I worked together in another business, but amazing guy. And we did great work for them.
What do you think inspires an agency to really create great work for their clients?
It's a sort of deceptively simple question because I think I from my observation of where I've been in agencies where there's fantastic work, and by fantastic work I mean work that powers the business to a different level, work that people all admire in the industry, work that against its rivals absolutely wipes the floor with them. And in First Direct we did that. Another fantastic client that WCRS had at the time, we launched Orange, which again, you might be too young to remember The Future's Bright, The Future's Orange.
Yes.
It was an amazing campaign.
Yeah.
Remember that.
Amazing campaign. And then when Vodafone and it was then Cellnet and there was a brand called Mercury, dreary. I mean, actually Mercury did quite good advertising using Harry Enfield, but Cellnet and Vodafone was boring business people in suits, looking powerful with their phones. And this wonderful brand came along called Orange, and had this incredibly optimistic, don't worry, the future's bright, the future's orange. And actually, when you look at the launch ad for that, it was so visionary because the voiceover said, imagine a world where you call people, not places. Imagine a world where it's wire free, and had this fantastic image of these wires being cut by a big pair of scissors. It was done by a director called Frank Budgeon, who's like one of the world's, he's sadly died now, but one of the world's best directors. And it had this incredible soundtrack by Philip Glass, the sort of minimalist composer. And this ad was just like, it was like a cultural moment in a sense. It was so far ahead of its time. You're going to play the Orange soundtrack?
Yes, let's have a look what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah, this baby.
This ring a bell?
Oh yeah. That's it.
In the future, you won't change what you say, just how you say it.
So interesting.
There's so many brilliant things. That was in 1994, I think, and the economy was in another recession. I think it was after Britain crashed out of the ERM or something. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, it was like a never-ending recession. And people were worried about technology at the time. Technology was going to take your job. Technology was going to make your life worse. Technology was something to be frightened of. And then this visionary brand came along with a child's voice. Don't worry, the future's bright. I don't think it was ever in their business plan, but they became number one brand in the market after 5 years on the back of that campaign.
Power of advertising.
Power of advertising, but also, and I think this is where I would say that, coming back to the question about great, an incredible chief executive who had made some very bold decisions about like the brand. As an example, then Vodafone and Cellnet used to, if you did a 10-second call, they'd round it up to a minute. So everything was rounded up to the nearest minute.
It's not fair.
Which was just, in effect, stealing from their customers. And it was like, imagine going to a petrol pump and they said, we're rounding up to a litre. Well, I'm paying half a litre of petrol I didn't even have. That was what they did. And Orange had per second billing, so you paid exactly what you used. And they built a much bigger network than they needed. So they put way more towers in than they needed. So it meant you just didn't drop calls. So they're the best network quality, per second billing, various other things that were really big, bold, expensive decisions for the management of Orange to take. And then we articulated those in incredibly powerful advertising. Most of it was about the product. It was about per second billing and great network quality and all that sort of stuff.
Just shows if you take risks as a business, that's where the rewards are.
Yeah.
So you're making your path to become CEO one day. How does that come about?
Well, I was MD at WCRS and the agency. We went on the back of Orange and BMW and Carling and First Direct. The agency in the sort of mid late 90s just went on a roll. I mean, we won business. We had the biggest win we'd ever had in our history, which was the National Lottery. So when that was launched by Saatchi's. Then after about 5 years, sales were falling and the lottery's reputation was in a terrible place and for various reasons. So they pitched for that, and that was our biggest ever win. And again, against really good competition.
How much was the budget for that?
I can't remember what the media budget, but it was a big media budget, 25 or 30 million. It was going to become overnight our biggest client.
Wow.
Even with some other big clients on board.
And it's the same company when you joined was in turmoil.
Yeah. So we went in 3-4 years from a fairly ropey place, a place where we won our biggest ever win.
What was the increase in turnover from when you joined to then?
I can't actually remember, but I remember Camelot added 15% to our revenue. So I think we were then round about, I can't remember, maybe a 20 million revenue agency, 200 or so people. So the agency grew, and we grew the management structure, and I became CEO. We appointed MD. We had an amazing team of people.
So that transition to CEO is something few people get, but I'm sure lots of people would like. What's your advice for someone who wants? Firstly, how did you become CEO? How did that transpire?
Well, I think just the nature of the amount of work we were doing and the complexity of what we were doing, and I was very close to the lottery business, so I was spending a lot of time on that, and we wanted to broaden the management team out. So it just felt like the natural next step. We were also trying to create an international network. We were owned by Havas, but we were sort of connecting up with some other agencies, with one in the US, and I think 3 or 4 in Europe, to create a new mini network.
What was the thinking behind that?
The thinking was that we needed an international network. As an example, Orange was launching in other countries, and we couldn't help them.
So your plan was to buy other agencies or start your own?
No, they were agencies that were already owned by Havas that in effect that we felt were like-minded, and we tried to group them together. So
how do you group 2 companies together overseas?
Well, it was there was a fantastic agency in America called Arnold, based in Boston. Lovely people and great work. They did VW in America at that time, and there was a great sort of cultural sort of, I think, fit between them. It was called Arnold Worldwide Partners, not necessarily the most exciting name, and then there was an agency in Germany, an agency in France, an agency in Italy. So we tried to create this network out of that, and then tried to get business flowing between us and pitching and so on. The thing that undoubtedly propels any career, whatever level, from account manager to account director or whatever, is tangible success. Doing great work that works for your clients, growing business, winning pitches, creating a sort of culture in a team where success happens. And that's how you make the transition at every level. So I think it's probably the same going from department head to MD, or an MD to CEO, or whatever. You don't get promoted if the business isn't going well.
What did you do as your first period as a CEO, and what does a CEO do?
Well, I think a CEO, and if you don't have a CEO, it's the MD that has this role. In effect, you're responsible for the think about it as you're responsible for the performance of the business. So we were then owned by Havas, and I'm the person responsible for the performance of the business. So the single person, in terms of the overall. So if you think about it, it's the person who's in effect responsible for the overall performance of the business. Now, if you're a public company, you're responsible to your shareholders. If you're, as we were, a subsidiary of a public company, I'm responsible to the parent company. So the CEO is the person who, if the business is underperforming, is the one who gets fired, generally. So you're always very conscious that you can probably have 1 bad year. You can't have 2 bad years, otherwise you'll be out.
Mm.
So what were you doing as a CEO to help the company grow? What were the key things you think worked well?
Well, I think you're always looking for, I suppose there's 3 or 4 things you always have in your mind, which is, first and foremost, your clients. Are your clients happy? And are your clients, are you doing good work for your clients? Are their businesses growing? So your first concern is your clients.
And how do you know that?
Because, so as an example, you know it because you obviously get the reports back from your people, and you hopefully got enough relationships with your clients to understand that. There were, I suppose there was a thing that I found a very helpful sort of meter for the week in terms of thing, like a rhythm of it. And I've been a huge believer in this. Is every Monday morning we'd have a status meeting, and me and the head of production and the creative directors, and would sit down 9 o'clock Monday morning. Then all the account leads would come in, and you go through every single job that's going through the agency. So at any one time we had, I don't know, I'm going to say 150 live projects. You wouldn't go through the minute. You wouldn't go through line by line each one, but you'd say broadly, the BMW account lead would come in and say, right, this is what's happening this week. This is what I need this week. We've got this big presentation, or what happens to be, or we're presenting for a new launch or whatever. So you'd know the big important things that the agency had to deliver that week for that client.
How do you keep it to time when you're discussing?
It was about 2.5 hour meeting, so we'd finish about 11:30. But so you wouldn't go through every single radio job or something like that. But it was the chance for the account lead to say, "I've got a problem here," or "This is really important," or client is unhappy here. We've got whatever it happens to be. So it's like your early warning system across all the business.
And would you resolve problems there and then?
Generally, or certainly everybody would know what they had to go and do. So often the creative services director would then go around and say, right, we need more teams on this because we've got a meeting on Thursday and the work's not good enough yet. So we need to put more resource on that. We can take resource off this. So it was the I don't know. It was like the equivalent of the air traffic control for the agency. So across, I don't know, we probably had 25 clients, 4 big ones, some medium sized, some smaller ones. So it's making sure everybody running those clients had their chance to sit down with the creative directors and the CEO and the planning director and the creative services director and tell them, I need this.
And what would you say is the key to running a great status meeting?
Well, you need, and when I joined the agency, and funny enough, the same thing when I joined DDB, you need a really, really good and tough project management creative services team.
What is a good and tough?
People who make the trains run on time. There's nothing that undermines, it's a simple business in a sense. There's nothing I think that undermines client relationships and confidence is just by being unreliable. Businesses are counting on you to deliver. Let's say you're launching a car or you're launching a new variant of a brand or just a new campaign. There's a whole load of other activity that's contingent on that. If you're late, your client not only the problem of you being late, but you've got the problems of probably 20 other things that depend on this that he's then got to or she's got to unravel and reconfigure. So being on time is, I think, a great attribute that often it's not. It sounds like a very uncool thing to say about agencies, and many agencies over the years had this culture of it'll be ready when it's right. Just the perfection of, when it comes, it'll be fantastic, but it'll be ready when it's right. And that's you've got to be right and ready on time. And I think that was something I always believed, and WCRS was hit and miss on that. And when I first was an account director, it was hopeless on it. It was shambolically bad.
And what were the other things? So you had your weekly
status, and then that really gave you that was like a temperature check every single week. Is the agency doing well? Are we on top of things? Are we running hot? Have we got problems? Is there a bottleneck somewhere? So you just know, and it's like retailers who go and you talk to any retailer, people who run Tesco, every week they're in the store. The chief exec will be in the store every single week, talking to customers, talking to their staff, finding out what's happening. And that was our, much smaller scale. That was our equivalent of that. And then I introduced something every quarter, which was we would do a measure of client satisfaction. And it's one question. And this business now runs across dozens of countries and industries, but we were the first ones to use it. It was developed by a guy in response to a brief I gave him. I said I want a simple health check every quarter on how are we doing. We were an agency that always had we did have a revolving door, and it was like a revolving door. We won clients and we lost clients. We were great at new business, but we were not so good at holding clients. So I wanted to stop that culture of just churn. So we had this client health check that every quarter they'd be asked one question, and there's been tons of academic research, but it's called the question that matters. And do you know what the question is?
I'm so excited. What is this question?
It's really simple. It's, would you recommend this agency to a friend or a colleague?
Yes or no?
No, 1 to 10 scale.
Oh, okay.
So if anybody scores you, I think less than 5, they are a detractor. And I think between 3 and 1, they're basically an active detractor. If they're between, I think, 4 and 6, they're a passive detractor.
What do you mean by detractor?
They don't like you. They're going to be saying when they're asked that question, no, I wouldn't. 7 is sort of okay. 8 to 10 is positive promoters. So you want to get as many of your clients, and we talk to everybody from the marketing director down to the team assistant in the marketing department. So everybody that you see, the brand managers and so on, we'd ask them that question, and we'd see the composite scores across our clients. And we would traffic light them. So you'd get either green, amber, or red against all those scores.
What's certified green?
8 and above.
8 and above. I love that, because I think there's maybe a lot of people who would think, okay, 7, that's good.
7's fine.
No, it's not bad.
7's okay.
But 7's okay.
Less than 7 is, less than 7. 7, I think, was an amber. 7 and 6 were amber. 5 and below were red.
And do you think that's the mindset you need to really succeed in?
Well, I think whether you use a system like that or not, I think you have to have the sort of mindset. I mean, I think there's always a sort of cliche of agency people. You need to be healthily paranoid. Although you may have very long-term relationships, actually the people are often, you might have worked with a company for 20 years, but across that time you would have worked with team after team after team at that company. People change a lot. So you're really only as good as your last quarter and your last year.
And this,
sorry, Ash, go on.
I was just saying, and this is something that began to see a lot across CEOs. Well, one thing that I'm beginning to see is that confidence to put something in place that can give you more data or give you a measure of things seems to be one of the themes that I'm seeing. Different CEOs do it in different ways. Yeah. I think one of the questions that came out of even our Unify sessions was that, what does it take to be a CEO? And I think it's a very flexible question depending on the environment that CEO's in and how much vision they have around what they can really put in place that will make that markable difference. Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is just knowing what's going well, knowing where the problems are, but having some objective evidence of it. Because sometimes internally people generally want to tell their boss things are great. Don't worry, it's all is good here. Well, it may be, or it may not be. You want to know, and I think if you like the twin sort of temperature checks of that weekly status meeting and that quarterly survey were really helpful. I mean, we would get the sense of the problems very, very mainly from the weekly status meeting. If we were continually going round the block on work, we presented work and it was turned down and we're reworking it, that's a problem. Yeah. So I introduced another thing which was really helpful. There was which we call right first time. So when we present work, does it get approved? Do we have to go back and rework it? Does it get rejected and we have to start again? Because every time you go round the cycle again, that's more time and more cost, and it generally also squeezes your time.
Yeah.
Which often squeezes the production time. The producers who are at the sharp end of that, if they thought they were getting 6 weeks and they suddenly got 3 weeks, that drives up the cost, drives down the quality. So if you can be right first time, work that the client loves, that's right for the brief, everybody's happy because it shows you understand the brief, that you understand the brand, your client, has confidence in you. If you're a marketing person, you don't want to turn the work down and make the agency go back and do it again. It's a pain. Ultimately, it's going to cost you more.
Yeah.
So we had right first time. We had our quarterly tracking on client satisfaction. We had a weekly status meeting, and those three things together were really useful, and they were great ways to for the account leads across all the business to measure how they were doing. And we used to review the data publicly, so they'd all see each other's data.
Brilliant.
So if you're running client X, you think, well, I don't want to be down there. I don't want to be 5s. That's really embarrassing in front of everybody else that my clients are giving us 5. You know, and so there's something about just giving people the tools to, giving them data to do their job.
Yeah, I really like that right first time element, because I think that's something we learned as a video production company in our earlier days, was that don't send something that's kind of almost there. Spend that extra time to make it there, and then the client's going to be happier, and it's a much smoother process.
Yeah, and everybody's happy. The work goes through better. There's more confidence in you for the next job. Yes. All of those things. I'm amazed more. I think some other agencies do it, but I just thought it's just like blindingly obvious. You do it in any other business. So anyway, so it's those sort of things. So I think, and then as a CEO, first of all, you worry about your clients and then your people at work. Have you got the right people? And then you worry about, because inevitably, it's a cheesy metaphor, but an agency is like a bath, but the plug is always out. I remember doing some work on this. The life cycle of clients is, you win a client and you tend to have your best year financially in year 2. And we looked at it over, 10 years of data, and we could see that years 3, 4, and 5 tended to be declining. And often years 5 and 6 or 7, that be when the client might review the business. And we didn't have, as an agency, apart from BMW, we didn't have really long-term relationships, because we weren't part of a big international network where you've got like Leo Burnett had been working with Kellogg's for 60 years and P&G for 70 years and so on. So we didn't have that. So we could see this life cycle. So the plug is always out. So in that sense, it's a cheesy metaphor, I know, but you have to have the taps on. You've got to be winning business. And so you've got to know stuff is coming at the top, because stuff is going to go out the bottom. So the other big thing is you focus on your reputation. You do, particularly as chief exec, you do a lot of new business. And, I did lots of new business. So, you're all pretty much in any pitch, pretty much every pitch.
So you're obviously doing well.
Yeah.
But you're having to put in the hours, working a lot, I imagine.
Yeah.
And you shared with us that, looking back, you didn't spend as much time with your children as maybe you would have liked. What do you think about that time, looking back now?
I think I worked long hours because I worked long hours, and I used to go out a lot as well. So there's a lot of stuff in the evenings. So I'd be out 2 or 3 times a week, every week. And
was that part of work as well?
Yeah, all work.
All work.
All work.
Seeing clients,
going to industry things, just stuff. It just seemed to be always busy. And I had a young family.
How old are your children?
My children, when I think when I was MD, I had 2 small boys, and my wife was, I think we just had our daughter, who's now 24. And my wife was working in an agency as well, and she was desperate to be a mum. And because I'd got a pay rise to be MD, she said, I can give up work. Thank God, I can resign. And she always says it's one of her happiest days ever when she resigned, and she could go off and be a mum. And we had a little girl then. We had another little girl. So we have 4 kids. And then the other thing, my wife was obsessed about living in the country. So we moved out to the country.
I heard you said, didn't you? You told us that you'd said to her, she wanted to move out to the...
I said in 1998, she said she really wanted to move and have a more country life. She'd grown up in London, was from a little girl had dreamt of living in the country. And I said, we'll move out in the year 2000. And as soon as I said, we'll move out, I think we moved in, I think it was the beginning of 98. I said that. I think we'd moved by about May 98. As soon as there was an amber light, we were gone. And we moved to Wiltshire, bought and a lot of people did in that time. We had a nice, like a 5-bedroom semi in Chiswick, and we sold it and we bought a farm in Wiltshire.
Nice.
Oh, lovely.
And animals?
An animal. We had horses and all that. Dogs.
That's lovely.
So you still got them?
No more horses actually. We owned horse. My wife's mad keen on horses and very good riding, for my 40th birthday, this is quite a high risk present. She bought me a horse.
Oh,
Wow.
you can't return that. Yes.
So,
Maybe
and it
not.
was terrifying. So I learned to ride at 40, and I loved it.
Pretty
and
cool.
I still ride now, but we don't own it. We don't own any horses anymore.
So the next stage in your career, is this where DDB comes in?
So I left WCRS WCRS was owned by Havas. We bought it from Havas, and it became an independent agency.
Why? Why did you make the decision to do that?
Because we felt we were in a sort of second tier network in Havas, and we felt we could do better on our own. We weren't getting much value about being part. If you're part of a network, you want to get value from being part of a network. We didn't feel we were having great value from being part of a network. Their big focus was on an agency called RCG. That was their number one network. That's where all their effort was, and we were in a second tier. So we didn't feel we were getting much value, we weren't getting much business, and we just saw an opportunity, and we went to them and said, "Can we buy the business?" And they said yes.
Cool.
We bought the business.
How much?
20 million quid.
20 million.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty good.
Well, it was a 20 million revenue agency, and
Okay.
it was it was a fair price for the business at the time.
Is it scary if it doesn't go well, or you
Yeah, it
feeling
was scary.
optimistic?
It was scary because in effect we swapped one master for another, which is the banks that we borrowed money from. And
I see. So you borrowed. How much did you borrow?
I can't remember how much we borrowed, but we raised some money and we borrowed some money, and we bought the business in fact in 2 stages, and then we relaunched it as Engine, so it became Engine.
Ah.
It's the birth of Engine.
Yeah, the birth of Engine. So we created this brand. We had 6 businesses under you had WCRS, and we had 5 other businesses under this Engine umbrella. And then
Talk about your new boss. What's that relationship like with the bank? And
it was well. In fact, there was a guy who joined the business called Peter Scott, who was the S of WCRS, and he handled all that really, really well.
Okay.
He was brilliant at all that stuff. I mean, he was fantastic at the sort of financial engineering. So we created this group, this great Engine, and it was
why the name Engine?
funny enough, we had an amazing sort of startup brand consultancy within it was just WCRS Group, and then their name was Dave. And so Dave, we briefed, okay, what are you going to call? We want a name that isn't just the agency brand, because we wanted this idea of an integrated brand where there's no lead discipline. So that was the vision behind it. So we want a neutral name that isn't the agency. Most groups were named after the ad agency.
Yeah.
So we wanted a new brand, and I remember we did an away day for them to present their ideas at Stamford Bridge, and out of season you can rent the directors' dining rooms, all the boxes for no, for a few £100. It was really good value. And you sit there and you look at this beautiful green turf, and you're in Stamford Bridge, and it's a great feeling of being in a football ground. And we had this away day at Stamford Bridge, and the Dave team presented, I think, 4 ideas in terms of names. And then they presented 2 or 3 design routes for each of the ideas, and we were seeing them, and I can't remember the other what the others were, but as soon as I saw Engine, as soon as I saw the typeface, we just said, that is it. And we thought, can we get it? Surely somebody was registered in, and nobody registered it.
Engine.
So we got
the name?
as Engine as a name. So I don't think we could get. I don't know whether we actually got the .com or not, but we certainly had engine.co.uk, and I think we may have even had the .com, but nobody registered the name.
How bizarre!
I know.
Great.
Great. And so we had this lovely. They did this beautiful design, and then
Is it the same design we see today? As
It's
Engine
pretty much the
logo?
same. Yeah. So when you go to Engine now, that was all done. Whatever that was, I can guess. I can't remember the year. 2006, something like that. 2005. So I was at Engine. I was the group chief exec, and I got approached to go to DDB through a headhunter.
And DDB, for those who don't know, what's the
DDB? It was
scale of it
so
at the time?
DDB was about twice the size of Engine in terms of income and people.
What were they doing income wise?
45 million, something like that. About 400 people.
Just in the UK?
Just in the UK, part of a big network. DDB, for those who don't know, it's now called Adam+Eve DDB, but DDB is in many ways the most admired brand in advertising. You could make an argument that it's the brand creatively above all. It's got a heritage above all others. And that's from Bill Bernbach in the B of DDB in the 60s. And it was then called Doyle Dane Bernbach. the Volkswagen campaign from the 1960s for the Beetle is like the invention of modern advertising. All advertising pre-VW looks, even stuff that was done in the 60s looked like it was from the 1940s.
Wow.
And DDB, there was like a creative revolution in America, of which DDB was right in the forefront. And the equivalent in the UK happened in the 70s with agencies like BBH and WCRS, but particularly one above all others, BMP. And DDB, when I joined it, was the fusion of BMP and DDB. So BMP was the agency that invented planning as a discipline. Amazing, amazing creative work through the 70s. So there was a 60s American creative revolution. There was a 70s British creative revolution. And DDB was the fusion of those two cultures, actually. And it was based in Paddington, still in the same building now. And it was the agency all through my career I'd always wanted to work at.
So when you got the call saying...
So I got a call, would you go and talk to them about being chief exec? Of course. Particularly as they turned me down twice before. I've been for interviews twice and had a slightly not good enough for us.
Okay.
So yeah, it was very nice. But again, the agency wasn't doing particularly well. They'd had a succession of management that hadn't worked out for various reasons. So I joined and
Were you not thinking, oh, here we go again. I'm joining a ship without an engine again.
I was just so excited to be joining this incredible agency that I'd always admired.
And did you think, what were you thinking? I can turn this around?
Yeah, I was thinking I could turn it around. I've done it before.
And what did you see when you got in there that was not working well?
There were loads of things that were working well. Really good people, fantastic clients, some great long-term relationships. VW was the sort of client that they'd had for 50 years. Did very, very good work for. Incredibly talented planning department, creative department, good people in account management. So lots of very good things. A fantastic digital business, Tribal DDB, amazing digital business. So there were loads and loads of good things about it. But for whatever reason, they'd not managed to find a sort of stability in the management team.
So people were constantly leaving.
So they'd had a couple of goes where there were short-lived sort of, chief execs in place for a year or 2 years that for whatever reasons didn't work out. So there was a sort of sense of a bit of instability there. They hadn't, for whatever reasons, hadn't found the right combination. And the agency wasn't doing particularly well in terms of new business. And I think it was a sort of sense of it was a big entity with a fantastically proud heritage, amazing work and amazing talent. And for whatever reason, it wasn't firing on all cylinders. And when I joined, it was there were problems. There were some clients that were unhappy. And again, funny enough, there were some very familiar problems. We weren't very reliable. We were late all the time. I spent my first couple of weeks talking to our clients and basically got a bollocking from most of them.
Really? Was that tough?
No, it was very, as a newcomer, it wasn't my fault. They were saying, look, I'm going to tell you this is what if I were you, this is what I would do.
And so you were making lots of notes.
Making lots of notes and saying, right, leave that with me. That's what I'll have a crack at that then. And so the clients told me what needed to happen. And that was about just become more consistent, deliver better, deliver more on time. Because when you're late, it causes us all sorts of problems.
So when you get this information, what do you do next?
Well, funny enough, I hired the creative service director from WCRS, who had in fact left WCRS to go and do something else, and I brought him in because I knew him really well, and he was fantastic, and he got within a year. It took a year to get the place really running well, in terms of just delivering work on time, and from that, if you have that platform of, your clients are confident that you're going to deliver, and you're delivering, good quality work. That just creates capacity and confidence and headroom to do other things. So you can then devote more resource to new business. If you're on the back foot with your existing clients, and then you're also pitching, you're putting more stress on an already stressed organization.
Yeah.
And therefore you don't win. I remember doing 4 or 5 pitches after I joined, none of which we won. I remember at the end of one of them thinking, thank God that's over. It was just horrible. Just difficult. We had the client in reception. We're still fiddling around with charts. I mean, miserable.
So did you instill the Monday status report?
And actually there was a very good
question.
They used to do a status report on Tuesdays.
Oh.
And I remember saying, well, 20% of the week is already gone. By the time you get around to doing your get together on Tuesday, I remember sitting in one on my first week, and I didn't know anybody, and I just sat there and I said, I'll just sit there at the side. And of course they're all thinking the new boss is sitting at the side here. And the poor old head of creative services was running through the status report, and he would it was the most desultory checking in. Everybody said, yeah, no, fine, no, but it was over in, 40 minutes. And I was thinking, oh my God. And I said to him, why do you do it on Tuesday? He said, well, because we need to get Monday to get up to speed and get all the day. I said, but a fifth of the week is gone and we're only beginning to start work in a sense of, so I moved it to Monday. Not rocket science, but we started on Monday morning, and I started we brought in this guy that I'd worked with. His name was Pete Spratt, who's a legend in creative services, and changed the energy in a sense. That just got us going on a Monday morning. So by 11 o'clock, we knew what was happening.
Excellent. And did you instill your one question?
Yep.
How
No, in fact, they were already doing it, because the people, the company that I had originally started working with, after we'd been running it for a year or two, said, do you mind if we go and sell this to some other agencies? And I said, be my guest, because actually we wanted benchmarks. They then could produce an average for other agencies. So we wanted to see, how are we doing versus our competitors? Not that they'd aggregate all the data. So you just said, here's the agency average, here's how you're doing. And now they've been doing it for 20 odd years, and they do it all over the world. So they've got amazing amount of data, and they still do it. And they do it for accountants and architects and other businesses as well as agencies.
So 2012,
yeah,
Adam+Eve is born.
Yeah.
2013 is when you leave the company. So
no, we Adam+Eve, I can't remember when they launched, probably 2009. We bought them in it was 2012, I think.
Oh yeah, sorry. They started in 2008.
Yeah, we bought them when they're about 5 years old, I think. Merged the two companies.
Tell us a story about that, because Adam+Eve would go on to have one of the best decades.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. They were. So I knew James Murphy a bit through the industry. I knew David Golding very well because he'd worked at WCRS. And
these are two of the founders.
Yeah, and Ben Murphy was the other founder. And there was a guy called John. I'll come back to me. I've forgotten his surname, but there were 4 founders. They were a fantastic group of people, and they'd built an amazing agency. Only about 70 or 80 people, but John Lewis and all the other stuff that was they were the best new agency for a decade. And I was talking to James. The idea emerged from a conversation.
How did it emerge?
It emerged over the course of quite a long evening.
Drinks?
A drink was taken, possibly. Okay. It was actually, and this is such an Adline cliche, it was in the Gutter Bar in Cannes on the last night. I think we probably talked from about 2 a.m. till about 4 a.m.
Wow.
And I remember going back to London the next day, going back to the office on Monday thinking, did we have that conversation?
Did that happen?
And I got in touch with James and said, did we have that? And he said, yeah, we did. And we met up, and
he's thinking, oh no, I hope he's not just gone, that was just a bit drunk.
And I think they wanted to sell the business. They wanted to be part of a bigger entity.
And what were you thinking?
I was thinking, they're an amazing business. Wouldn't it be fantastic to have those two, bring these two together? And I thought, if they're going to sell, well, I want them to sell to us, not anybody else. We started that conversation going, and I can't remember how long it took, but it took a few months to do, and then we announced it. We did loads and loads of planning. James and I would meet, because we were so paranoid about secrecy about it. We would meet in, out of the way places and underground. And in fact, we used to rent hotel rooms to go and meet in a room because we just didn't want to be seen talking.
Well, if you had been seen, what would have happened?
Well, funny enough, the rumours started going around because that they were thinking of selling.
So you didn't want other competitors to come in.
But also, I didn't want because these things are never done till they're done.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to go public until it was done.
Mm.
You know, we didn't want anything leaking, and unfortunately, it did leak. So we had calls from campaign saying very authoritatively, "We know you're buying Adam+Eve. Please, you know, you're going to have to confirm it." And
What do you say?
I said, "No, we're not."
You said no, we're not.
No, I said, "We're not. No, we're not buying Adam+Eve."
Okay.
You know, basically you couldn't say, "Well, we're in talks," because then people would take it as confirmation.
Mm.
So I'd always deny. Of course, it's not done until it's done.
Mm. Yes,
So,
we're not buying it because
we're
we
not
haven't
buying
bought
it
it yet.
because we haven't bought it yet.
Yeah.
We're buying it when we've bought it. You know, so because these, you know, as you've seen over the years, you've seen it time and time again. In, you know, talks have been going on, and then talks break down, and it damages both parties.
And Matt Goff shared a story with us who was one of their first employees in 2008. And he said that he was taken in cars with blackout windows into the office, into the underground car park.
Yeah.
And you told the team at your company at DDB there was something wrong with the office.
That's true, yeah.
And everybody had to...
We had to... so they wanted to see the building.
Yeah. Had the deal been done by this point?
No, but we were confident the deal was going to be done. So James, the four partners.
It's like a marriage. Come see my house.
Come see our house. The four partners, and then there was Matt and Tammy and one or two others. Probably about 8 or 10 people that were the key people at Adam+Eve, and they wanted to come in the building before the deal. They wanted to see the new home, and so I said they were really keen to do this, and it was like, okay, we'll do this. Now this was
you're still trying to keep everything secret, and you've got to bring them in.
So this was a building that we, you know, people back and forth all night into this building. So we told the building everybody was closed because we were having some major electrical work or something like that. And I remember we had it wasn't blacked out. It wasn't quite as dramatic as blacked out.
I might have added that. I don't know.
You might have. There's, you know, you'd never let the truth get in the way of a good story. But we did have, so the only people who knew were the finance director, because obviously she was involved with doing the deal, and me. And we'd nobody else knew. We'd come up.
Oh, just you,
just us,
and the finance director, and the whole 400-person agency.
We were the only two people who knew.
Wow, and maybe some people at the bar in Cannes who forgot.
So we then had this cock and bull story about the some electrical work or something. Everybody was out by 7, and I know I was in a cab with some of them, and there was another cab, and we had this, and we were in a holding pattern. And Shirley, the finance director, said, "Right, the coast is clear. In you come." So 5 minutes later, we're pulling out, and Shirley goes, "No, drive around! Somebody's walking out the front."
Oh,
so I think we may have had to do a loop around the block, and somebody just tried to come back in, and the night watchman said no, we're closed, so they'd gone off. So we then came back around, and we went in, and they had a look around, and then skedaddled out.
They obviously liked what they saw because the deal was eventually done.
Yeah, I mean the building then actually we'd done a refurb, so the building looked okay.
Matt said that he came and you showed him, the place, and he thought, "This is absolutely wonderful." They'd been in a small place, and he said, "Right, that's one floor." And then there was loads of other floors to show.
There was a basement, there was a mezzanine floor, and there were 5 floors, I think.
He thought that was it, that floor, and he was amazed by that.
It was like we had 400 people. We had a DDB Europe's headquarters on the top floor, so big studio. There was a lot of people in there, and I think the merger happened. I became chairman.
How does that happen?
Well, it was just so James was chief executive. We merged. We tried to merge the teams, but it was largely the Adam+Eve people had the key roles. So Ben was creative director and so on. So David was planning director. So some of the DDB people left. Some we brought the two businesses together, and literally from the first day of the four partners came over. I remember we presented to the whole of the DDB company, and Ben Priest and I did the bulk of the presentation. And Ben did a brilliant thing. I'd written a really dreary presentation, and he said, "Do you mind if I just take your charts and just work with them?" Anyway, binned all my boring stuff. And he wrote this brilliant presentation, and like about 5 charts. And then we made a combined reel. So we put the best of the DDB work together, the best of Adam+Eve, and we played it as one reel. Just not here's the Adam+Eve ads and here's the DDB ads. We just played them all sort of intermingled. And of course, the reel was awesomely good. And Ben did a fantastic presentation. So I did an intro, and I think James stood up and said a few words. Then Ben did the bulk of it, from what I remember. And he had this fantastic chart, which is a David Bailey shot of the Krays, famous shot of the Kray brothers, East End villains. And Ben said, "We're a gang." That's the way we like to run things. We're a gang. We're all in a gang together. We all look out for each other. We are now a big gang. And of course, everybody's in the agency going, "Oh God, I want to be in their gang." So that went really well. His presentation was so good. And then we played the reel. And of course, everybody loved the reel. And actually, Ben told a lovely story, which I didn't know that he did on the day. He said, so when I was a little boy, my dad worked for VW. And he used to come home and talk about all the great ads that DDB were doing for VW. And I looked at Ben and thought, I did not know that. And of course, that immediately won the hearts and minds of the DDB folks. And they were just brilliant. The Adam+Eve people were fantastic. All of their people were fantastic. I think we'd planned the integration very well. They moved over from there. They were in Covent Garden. They moved in about 4 or 5 weeks after we'd announced the merger. We reorganised all the floors. It went really well. What I thought might take 6 or 9 months for it to all gel, as soon as they were in it, it was working really well.
And what's happened since with Adam+Eve DDB?
They've done all right. I mean, they went. I left about I think a year after that, and I left because, I felt that was it. It's a bit like being at somebody else's party. I was done, and I wanted to go and do some other things, and I had 3 other things I wanted to go and do, so I went off and did those.
So what did you do?
Yeah, what were those?
I joined the NHS as a non-exec director in a hospital, so completely different. So I became on the board of a hospital in Brighton. We were living in Sussex by then, and so I joined this hospital board. I'd started a business about 3 years earlier while I was at DDB with, in fact, going back to the First Direct, with the marketing director of First Direct and a good friend of mine. And that was I won't bore you with all that, but anyway, it was meant to be a challenger bank. It was an app driven.
So you started a bank.
It offered a current account service, but it in effect aggregated other people's technology. So we didn't have a banking license. We used somebody else's banking license, our basically card provider's banking license. So we started that. We raised money for that and did that. And I started doing like a 1 or 2 day a week role for Next 15, actually, who ended up buying Engine. So doing these 3 things. So I was juggling these 3 things.
So if you're someone they've got to that stage where they'd like to be a non-exec director, how do you make that happen?
Well, I think it helps if you start your own thing. So we'd started this business, and then just I mean, how does you look at when I applied for the NHS job, I was thinking, why on earth are they going to hire a bloke from advertising? And it had a very rigorous interview process, and tough interview for it.
What did they want to know?
Well, they asked lots and lots. They sent a big briefing pack about all stuff about the hospital, and then they asked really difficult questions about it, and like really difficult questions about what would you do if this, and what would you do in that, and 4 people on an interview panel. So a very formal process, and then was appointed. But of course, what they wanted is people from outside the NHS who know nothing about healthcare to ask the difficult questions. This was in the wake of something called. There was an enormous scandal in Mid Staffordshire Hospital where terrible care over many, many years. And they worked out something like 400 people died that should never have died because the care in hospital was so poor.
I lived in Stafford around that time.
Oh, well, you know where that hospital. Well, you know what a scandal that was. So I joined just after that. So the NHS was looking for people who weren't from the healthcare industry to be outsiders to ask difficult questions. So our job, in fact, my first board meeting, we had a briefing from the solicitor who'd run the Mid Staffordshire inquiry, and it was a pretty harrowing briefing about what went wrong there. And he pointed at us as the non-execs. There were 6 non-execs, 3 new ones, of which I was one. He said, "Your job is to make sure they don't tell lies." And he pointed at the executive team, the chief exec and clinical director and the head of nursing and so on. Make sure they don't tell lies, because the management team at Stafford had lied, covered up. their problems.
Is that what you did?
No, we did. Well, we were there to hold them to account.
Okay.
And it was the board meetings were held in public as well. So the public could come along and watch what was happening. And journalists were there. So they used to report what was happening live from the board meetings. So yeah, it was tough, hard work in a sense, because these are wasn't a particularly well performing hospital. So anyway, I did that, and I did the startup, and I worked for Next 15. So I did those three things.
So we're getting to your current roles now.
Yeah.
So 2016.
So that was from 2013, and then in 2016, I think that summer, I saw that my predecessor was leaving the AA, and I thought I'd love to do that job.
And so, for anybody who doesn't know, Advertising Association. It dates back to 1924.
Yeah, 26.
26.
Yeah, 1926, and it was formed to, in effect, represent the whole industry, the interests of the whole industry. So it was formed in the 1920s by ISBA, representing the advertisers, the IPA, and the big media owners of the day, which were publishers, newspaper publishers.
So 1924 is the year that the Associated Advertising Clubs of the World staged the International Advertising Convention in Wembley.
Right. Yes.
And they formed District 14.
District 14.
Sounds like a film.
Yeah.
And then
that was because the first 13 districts were in America.
I see.
So you think, why are we District 14 or whatever? And I look back at the history. It's because District 1, I think, was New York. District 2 was probably Chicago. So America was divided up into 13 districts, and we were District 14. Okay. And then the AA was formed in 26. And in a sense,
were you still part of those other 13, or it became its?
No, it became its own thing. Run, in effect, ISBA and the IPA were key members and the media owners, and it grew over it's been going ever since. So it's come up for its a few years away from our 100th.
Amazing! What a celebration that'll be.
I know.
So what, in simple terms, for anybody who doesn't know, does the Advertising Association do? So
our job is to, in effect, promote the role and the rights of responsible advertising. So it's the role of advertising in the economy, its role in society.
What is the role of the advertising in the UK economy?
So if you think about if you think about think about how the economy works. It's driven. We are a mixed, liberal democracy with a capitalist economy. So it's the private sector that powers everything. All of the taxes and all of the wealth of the country comes from the private sector. So, governments can do is raise money through taxes and borrow money, but all they're borrowing is money against future taxes. So you have to have a vibrant, dynamic private sector to create the wealth of the economy. And if you look at advertising, it's the thing that is absolutely goes hand in glove with competition and innovation. So that the things that drive material progress and so on in any mixed modern economy are competition and innovation. If you don't have competition, you don't get much innovation. And you don't have much competition without advertising. And competition drives better products, better services, reduces prices, means that firms always have to be competing like mad for their customers. So advertising is a critical part of a modern, competitive, dynamic, successful economy.
So in monetary terms, what does advertising contribute to UK economy?
So we've done lots of work over the years. So if there's a model that we developed in the UK that's now been run all around the world by Deloitte, actually, and it demonstrated that for every pound of advertising, ultimately generates about £6 of GDP. So it has a big multiplier effect, because obviously it sells more products and services, but actually it also drives competition and innovation. And then obviously those people who work in the business, it has a supply chain that creates jobs and wealth in that supply chain. The people who work in the business, spend the money that they earn, that creates jobs in the supply chain. So it's probably about £3 of that is direct and probably £2 of that is indirect. So it's about £1 to 6, and that's been shown across the world. That ratio for most economies, it's between 1 in 5 or 1 to 7. Fast-growing economies that are developing fast, it might be a higher ratio, like £1 to 7. More mature economies, it tends to be 1 to 5, 1 to 6.
And in terms of contribution to GDP,
so if you think about that if ad spend this year is about 30 billion, then say it's about 180 billion contribution to GDP.
180 billion.
Yeah. So and if
the UK economy, is that right?
Yeah, the UK economy. I think the UK economy is about £2 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a decent contributor to the economy.
Sizable amount of money.
Yes,
Yeah.
very sizable.
Yeah.
And how much is spent on advertising every year?
About 30. Well, this year, last year, it'll be just a shade over 30 billion.
And I guess this year is probably going to be a fair amount more.
This year will be up as well.
Yeah.
But we're forecasting it to grow. But the forecasts were done with some of the news that we've got at the moment, but primarily these forecasts were done pre the Ukraine war and all the stuff that's going. And clearly there's going to be massive inflation. I mean, there was already a lot of inflationary pressure. The Ukraine war is going to exacerbate that. So we're probably in for a tough couple of years. The global economy is in for a tough couple of years because of high inflation, and then the Ukraine war just throws, makes everything that was difficult much worse, let alone all of the political and human cost of that.
So what's your advice to businesses who may be facing a tough couple of years?
You want to go into any tough times as lean as you can be, as competitive as you can be, because, tough times tend to sort of, good firms come through stronger, weaker firms have a tougher time. So you've got to do everything you can to go into it in the best place you can be. So really good control of your costs, really good control of the way you work, good control of the quality of the products that you make, the services that you sell. Hopefully, loyal customers and, resilient, enough resilience to tough it out. Because, if it's a tough couple of years, inevitably, having worked through at least 3 recessions, tough times come to an end and better times return. So you want to be sure that you're going to come through.
Any specific metrics for an advertising
Well, I think for
company?
advertising businesses, it's particularly, most agency businesses will run, on a ratio of staff costs to income.
What would a good number be?
Well, if you think about if for every £100 you earn, you probably, there's 2 very easy rules of thumb. You probably don't want to be spending more than 55% of what you earn. So every £100 you earn, if you're spending more than about £55 on your people, you've got to have very low overheads, because let's say you sort of have £20-25 of overheads. So for that £100, you might have 55 on people, 25 on other overheads like your office and travel and all the other stuff. And then you might be making £20-25 profit. So 20% margin is a good margin to aim for. If your costs are out of line with that, another benchmark that is probably still a good rule of thumb is probably for every employee in an ad agency, you probably want to be making over £100,000 revenue per employee. So if you have 200 people, you would be making 20 million revenue.
And if your margin is
that may have changed. That's when I was doing it. May with inflation might be you want to be making 120,000 revenue. But those so they're quite simple metrics in a sense.
And if your margin is at, say, 10%, 12%, what can you do to increase that to 20?
Well, you might be in a part of the market where there's lower margin because there's more competition and it's just more expensive, to deliver the services. So it just means you've got a narrower, you've got a narrow a window. It's how much cash do you? All of these things, very old-fashioned principles for any business, but cash in the business. How much cash is on your balance sheet? Have you got enough cash to be able to weather a year or two of making no profit or even losses? So, strength of your balance sheet. How much do you own? If you're part of a holding company, clearly holding companies are massively well resourced. But let's say you're an independent agency business, have you got shareholders with deep pockets that are going to put more money into the business if it's needed? Do the management have the resources to put more money into the business if it's needed? Do you have enough cash in the business to ensure that if you have hard times that you can weather those? Those are the things that, business, not just agencies, but any sort of businesses, they run out of cash. And nobody will, and of course banks won't lend the money if they're a bad risk. Generally, banks will lend when you don't need the money and be much tougher when you do.
Great business advice.
As a rule of thumb, don't count on them when the going gets tough. Would be my experience of that world, because they will see you as a bad risk. They're not going to, it's going to be very hard to get money when your business is in a tight spot.
And here's one of the kind of closing questions we have.
Yeah.
And that's, what's next for you?
Well, what's next is actually we've got a huge amount of stuff at the AA. So when I think about what's next, I'm thinking about what's next week. What are we doing this year? Later this year, we've got some really big programs like Ad Net Zero, which I mentioned earlier on, which I think is hugely important to us.
What is Ad Net Zero?
Ad Net Zero is the program to take the advertising industry to net zero carbon by 2030. And we launched it in the UK in November 2020. We had a first global summit in 2021 at COP26 rather. And this year, I hope we're going to be able to expand into other countries. So to turn it into a global movement, to take the global advertising industry to net zero by 2030. So hopefully we will be able to do that at some point this year. I love working, so I'm not planning on retiring anytime soon. I've got friends who are retiring, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I absolutely don't want to retire.
What are your hopes for the changes you'd like to see in the advertising industry over the next 10 years?
Well, I mean, I think we think it's going to have to become much, much more sustainable. It needs to become much more inclusive, and it needs to be more trusted. And I think one of the big challenges is it goes through enormous change in terms of technology and so on. We've been through one huge revolution in terms of digital revolution. There's going to be a Web 3.0 type of revolution around the way technology is going to take it. So this is going to be this hybrid of technology and creativity that is so exciting. The business is going to go through enormous change in the way that it's gone through over the last decade or more. But through all that change, our focus is to make it as sustainable as possible, to make the best contribution to society it can make, be a force for good in the economy.
You mentioned being more inclusive. How is that?
So we launched last year. We launched something called All In, which is now a 6-point action plan to address all of the areas around diversity and inclusion. So it's traditionally people focus on gender and ethnicity. So we're looking at those things, but we're looking at age, we're looking at disability, we're looking at sexuality. So we're looking at, in effect, all the protected characteristics in the law. And we did, first time it's ever been done, we did a survey last year of the whole industry called All In. We had 16,000 respondents. So wow. Amazing response.
It's a great pool of data.
Yeah, enormous pool of data. And that we've now got data on every aspect of diversity. And out of that, we've got actions that we're introducing, or we've introduced, and we've got another 3 to come later this year to try and address those challenges that have been there for a long, long time. And there's been enormous desire from the industry to be, in effect, more inclusive and be more like the country and the population that the industry serves. So we now know a lot more about what we need to do. And so we've got a program on that.
One of those statistics from the All In census was only 6% of execs are of a non-white ethnicity.
Yeah.
So I mean, 94% are.
Yeah.
What do you think needs to happen for that to change?
Well, the interesting things we found from the data is exactly so. We're actually pretty good at recruiting people, people from all backgrounds, from all ethnicities. What we're poor at is retaining them.
Why do you think that is?
Because, this is what the data shows, is that they for whatever reason, they after, I think it was 32% of people who identified as non-white people working in the industry said they plan to leave the industry in the next 2 years. And they had a whole number of reasons for that. They felt they didn't feel it was for them. They didn't feel that they were well understood. They didn't feel that they were well integrated in the industry, and so on. So that was that compared, I think the number for white staff was 8%. And when we look within ethnicities, I think for black staff, it was highest at 32. I think for Asian staff, I think it was 27 or 28. So we've done a lot of work on why that's the case. So rather than just have one great homogenous BAME category, which I think is there's as much difference within that category as there is in, from if you look at South Asian, there's huge differences between the South Asian community, between Bangladeshis and Pakistani, and religious differences and all these other, masses of difference. So we've engaged the groups of people who really know what the issues are. So so as an example, with Asian talent, there's a group called MIFA, which stands for Media for All, which is a sort of powerhouse of the sort of Black and Asian leaders in the industry. So they're engaged in this program. What we need to do. There's I think less of a recruitment challenge and there's more of a retention challenge. So it's about making sure that those people who are in the business stay in the business and work their way up, because you don't jump from 2 years in the business to the top level. You've got to work your way up and compete your way to the top.
What would you tell CEOs of organizations for how to do that?
Well, it is about listening to the data. It's about looking at why, understanding why. There's some amazing work going on amongst many agencies. People like Mediacom is a fantastic example, who I think perform really well. But it's about understanding the experiences, understanding what needs to be the same, what needs to be different, and how to make the reason why it's called All In is because we want everybody to feel that they're all in. Everybody's welcome. Whatever your background, this is a place where everybody can feel they can be themselves, be there and do their best work. So it's about understanding, where the problems are, where the blockages are, is it cultural issues, is it confidence issues, there's all sorts of intersectionalities between, say, ethnicity and class. Advertising it trends towards being, as most creative industries do. And advertising, when you look at the creative industries, is middle of the pack. Journalism is even more white and middle class than advertising, as an example. Television is even more so. A lot of the professions have the same issues. So it's about understanding what the barriers are and understanding, how to make sure that people feel welcome, but people feel it's a place for them. And part of that is seeing people like them at every level in the company.
And there's Brim.
It came out of an incredible group that Meta chair, which is out of their client council. So it came from advertisers, mix of advertisers and agencies. It's chaired by Dougie at VCCP. Mm-hmm. It's an action plan for businesses to integrate to make sure that black talent specifically has the support and the roadmap and the route map for success. And then so Brim, there was a Brim framework, there's a social mobility framework. So we've asked companies to think about, we haven't asked them to do, we've just asked them to commit to the Brim framework. We've asked them to commit to the social mobility framework, because there's a class issue as well as an ethnicity issue. So these things they're not necessarily either simple problems or simple solutions, but it's about management's looking very hard at what they do currently, and they may believe that we're fine, and look at all the great work we do. Well, they may be fine, they may be better, or they may not be. The data has been able to show people how they, if they've had a big enough sample in their own company, we've been able to show their data versus the average for the set. And some of the companies have found that very useful. So this is a really, this is a big, long journey. When I was at the IPA, I chaired the first initiative on ethnic diversity in 2002. So 20 years ago.
Wow. So
we've made some improvements, but nobody would say we've done as well as we would have hoped. So this is a long-term program, like Ad Net Zero is a long-term program. We're not going to go from where we are currently to being a sustainable net zero industry, but we'll get there.
Yeah, that's it.
And I think this is probably a 8-10 year program, but I also think the work is never done on these sort of things. You've got to keep working at it.
Yeah, and progress happens when real tangible change is done.
Yeah,
changes are made, and there are no more excuses.
And I think it was one of the things that we saw, and you've probably picked it up in your conversations, is the pandemic was like a reset moment. You know, if people were whatever they were doing in their businesses in 2019, if they, let's say they were focusing on diversity in their business, they come out of the pandemic and say, we've really got to do this. We've got to fix this now. We've just all had the biggest disruption ever. And I think there's I picked up you hear it from so many leaders from across the industry, is we're not going to go back to how things were. We're going to really use this is like a giant shot of a mixture of, I suppose, fear and adrenaline. You know, we've got to make things better.
Definitely.
And yeah, I hope you picked that up from all your conversations.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So a summary we like to end with of your life.
Blimey.
I think one thing that's come.
I was actually going to do a quick impromptu poem then.
That was one of the plans, to try and create a summary poem while we're going.
You're going to have to freestyle it.
You're going to have to freestyle it.
Okay. You got a moment to prepare. Okay. Stephen had 30 minutes to you got 30 seconds.
Oh, right.
Yes, your story, I think, is great. It's a great business story. How to turn businesses around if there might not be a sinking ship, but one engine's down. Get a new engine in and get it going, get people motivated. And you seem to have these great core principles that you put in place that get the business back on track and get it thriving. And knowing what those principles that really work for you are and work for businesses is seems to be a really key thing. And a passion for being part of change and being part of industry-wide change and being part of the solution. And not just saying, oh, well, I'm one of many part of the industry, but actually playing an active role in it, getting involved in the Ad Association, the amazing work that Ad Association does for the industry in a lot of areas.
I do, and I think it's something that people who are successful in advertising have. They're very restless people, and it's, if you think about it, it's a business where how many businesses will create 100 ideas a day, and then the next day we'll create another 100. The next day after that, we'll create another 100, and the ones they created on Monday, they've forgotten about. And that is the nature of it. This is a business full of people who who are very restless, and they want to make new things all the time. And I think that's why I've loved the business, and that's why it's such an interesting and exciting business to be in, because you get that sense of always moving on. Whatever you did last week doesn't really matter. It's on to the next thing.
I think given it's a creative industry, it has an opportunity to create new ways of doing things, which other industries can look at and go, okay, they've done that really well. Yeah. And let's learn from that. Yeah. And so great opportunity, but responsibility. Yeah.
And I think, advertising has great power, and we always, there's a cliche to say, but, with great power comes great responsibility. We've got to we've got to be a force for good, not just drive the economy and drive competition. We've got to be a force for good as well.
Definitely.
Go on, Ash.
Here we go.
Let's hear it.
Go.
From the 70s, a world of music and fashion, moving into advertising, following his passion, identifying what's wrong and creating a solution, problem solving as he went, creating agency improvements.
Thank you.
Did you really just do that just now?
I really just did that right now.
Skills there.
I'm
skills
impressed.
To pay the bills.
I'm very impressed. Skills to pay the bills.
Hit up Ashley Sammons McKenzie if you need
commissions, I can do them.
Good on you. Well, thank you. That was lovely. Yeah, very good. Thanks. It's been really enjoyable talking. I don't know how much you're actually going to use of this, but presumably you're going to ruthlessly edit it down.
There was great gems all along the way. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the contribution to the industry. Yes. Thank you for pushing the industry forward in so many areas, and keep doing the great work. And as you held the NHS to account, hold the advertising industry to account for doing great things, and let's have a great future.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. Agree.